Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Book of Celtic Myths, from the mystic might of the Celtic warriors to the magic of the Fae folk, the storied history and folklore of Ireland, Scotland, Brittany, and Wales, by Jennifer Emick, narrated by Wendy Tremont King. Introduction. Who were the Celts? The Celt and his cromlechs and his pillar stones. These will not change much. Indeed, it is doubtful if anybody at all changes at any time. In spite of hosts of deniers and asserters and wise men and professors, the majority still are averse to sitting down to dine 13 at table, or being helped to salt, or walking under a ladder, or seeing a single magpie flirting his checkered tail. William Butler Yeats. Warriors, poets, scholars, and visionaries. From the depths of time, the ancient Celts fascinate us. Their rich heritage lives on today through the millions of people who can claim Celtic ancestry. Celts and their traditions are among the foundation stones of our culture. But who were they? In the following chapters, we will explore the wonder and wisdom of this mysterious people. The people we call the Celts arose about 7,000 years ago in the Caucasus Mountains bordering the Black Sea. Rapidly they moved west, settling in what are now France, Germany, Spain, and Italy. Finally, they crossed the North Sea, settling in Britain and Ireland. The Celts had no defining physical characteristics. What we mean today by the term Celt is people who spoke a certain family of languages. These include Scots Gaelic, Irish, Manx, Cornish, Welsh, and Breton. Sadly, most of the Celtic languages are extinct, although a few, such as Welsh, have undergone a revival. As the Celts moved west, they found ancient monuments built by those who worked the land before them. Circles of standing stones, pointing like lonely fingers at the sky. Often, isolated stones displayed carved designs featuring loops and whorls. The Celts wove these places into their myths. The stones marked entrances to another world, they said. There dwelt the Tuatha De Danann, a strange folk of great magical craft and power. The most notable characteristics of the early Celts was their extraordinary artistic ability. Highly skilled metal workers, they introduced all of Europe to the art of iron forging, and with it brought advances in agriculture and warfare. From the forges of the Celtic smiths came both farm implements and fearsome weapons, from swords and spears to great wheels for wagons and war chariots. These objects were common in the great Celtic civilization that arose in northern Italy about 300 BCE. The Latin culture. It was these people who refined the artistic style we now associate with the Celts: undulating lines, spirals, and the first appearance of what we all instinctively recognize today as the Celtic knot: sinuous patterns of interlaced loops and curves. The Latin people flourished until they ran up against the rising power in Europe, Rome. The beginning of the conquest of European Celts by the Romans was described by Julius Caesar, by whom it was called the Gallic Wars. These wars, continuing long after Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, were fought during the latter part of the 1st century BCE, and for 150 years afterward. By the end, the Celts had been conquered, but their culture continued. Celts had passed across the North Sea to the British Isles. There they established themselves in the south and the north, and to the west in Ireland. Celtic society. Early Celtic society was divided into tribal groups called tuatha. A tuath, singular, was like a kingdom in miniature, a family group that usually claimed descent from a common ancestor. Each tuath was headed by a king, or sometimes a queen, who usually claimed descent from one or more tribal ancestral deities. In times of peace, the king was both ruler and an administrator of justice. In times of conflict, he was a warlord. The king was vested in his office through his symbolic marriage with the land, which was personified as a goddess. This rite of investiture ensured the fertility of the land, and is echoed endlessly in mythological tales. Under the king were the nobles, or flaithe, warriors, artisans, lawyers, poets, and other skilled citizens. Under the noble class were the freemen who kept the flocks, tilled the soil, and paid rent to the nobles. One respect in which the Celts were different from their neighbors is noteworthy. Women occupied an important place in society. Many of the most significant deities of the Celtic pantheons were female, ranging from powerful, nurturing earth mothers to fierce goddesses of war. The women of Celtic mythology are likewise portrayed as brave, resourceful, even crafty. These heroines did what they wanted, when they wanted, even when it meant disaster. Celtic wives often accompanied their husbands to battle, and were not always content to keep to the sidelines. There are numerous accounts of Celtic warrior women and their achievements in battle. Some of these warrior women were so notable in their achievements that they became teachers of the art of war, owners of their own martial academies. Many became legendary. The other world. The body of Celtic mythology gives much evidence of Celtic beliefs in reincarnation and life after death. These stories spoke of the other world, for although its entrances are usually under the earth, it is believed to exist commingled with the world of men and can even be reached by sea. At certain times of the year and in certain geographical locations, the veils or mists that conceal one world from the next could be breached, and both men and spirits could travel between them. One such place, found in the Welsh otherworld, was Annwn, the Isle of Apples, which came to be known later as Avalon and figures heavily in Arthurian legend, as we'll explore in a later chapter. Although Arthur is portrayed as a Christian king, it is to Avalon where he is taken to die, after being mortally wounded by his nephew Mordred. Today, Avalon is often associated with the great Tur that soars above the town of Glastonbury in southern England. There is also much evidence that Celts believed in reincarnation. Mythological stories abound with episodes of rebirth and reincarnation, especially in relation to water. A repeating feature of battle stories is the cauldron or spring of rebirth, by which slain warriors return to life. The Celts were, as we can see, a deeply spiritual and artistic people. Gods, magic, and wisdom made up an intimate part of their lives. In the following chapters, we'll explore together the legends their bards sang as the people gathered around the fire, and a pale moon shone down upon silent standing stones. Chapter 1. Celtic Mythology and the Book of Invasions. The ancient Celts had a noted abhorrence of written records. They kept no scriptures, history, or genealogy, and preferred to preserve their religious teachings through the sacred oral traditions of the Druids. unfortunately, the majority of this ancient wisdom was lost forever with the coming of Christianity to the Celtic Isles. Druidry gave way to the persuasive proselytizing of westward-sweeping Christians, and with none to take on the bardic task, the old ways gradually fell away. Ironically, the task of recording the remnants of Celtic mythology fell to the Christian monasteries, and the remnant of Celtic wisdom was preserved by those who destroyed it. Sources of Celtic mythology. In the time of the Druids, the ancient oral myths and stories were maintained in strict secrecy. As the Druidic tradition faded, these stories spread among the wider population. The Irish Church undertook to preserve Celtic mythology in the 7th century, when its monasteries began to set pagan tales to paper. These scribes of the Church rewrote the ancient gods as human beings, heroes and magicians, whose tales they regarded as the history of the Celts. As well, the monks often added Christian elements to the stories, often distorting them almost beyond recognition. Because these tales are presented as histories, they neglect any intentional exploration of Celtic theological ideas, resulting in a paucity of stories of the creation of earth or mankind. The myth cycles do, however, give a very good idea of ancient Celtic customs and lifestyles, and they reveal much about the character of the ancient gods and goddesses. The greatest wealth of Celtic mythology is contained in 3 major collections of texts, known as the mythological cycle, the Ulster cycle, and the Fenian or Fionn cycle. A looser, less regarded collection is known as the historical or King's cycle, a record of the lives and adventures of the legendary kings of Ireland. Another popular source of mythological tales is the Mabinogion, a series of Welsh mythological tales with early Arthurian elements. The Dagda and Bridget. According to one version of the Celtic origin myth, not contained in the Book of Invasions, in the beginning there was a great void. Although the earth existed, it was in chaos, bubbling and boiling in confusion. Into this there poured from the skies streams of water that cooled the volcanoes and watered the deserts. They gave rise to life. From the newly formed soil sprang a great tree, a sacred oak named Bille. The divine water called Danu nourished and fed it until it produced 2 great acorns. From the first acorn came a god, the Dagda, who was male and known as the good god. From the second came a goddess, Bridget, the exalted one. The 2 settled by a great stream of water. Since it had its origins in Danu, they named it Danuvius, a name that is preserved to the present day as the Danube River, which flows through the European continent. The Dagda and Bridget built 4 great cities, Phalius, Gorius, Phineus, and Morius. The descendants of the Dagda and Bridget inhabited these cities. Those who paid special worship to Bridget and to the knowledge she imparted learned of crafts, of healing, and of poetry. The early Celtic word for knowledge was vid, and the word for oak was dru. Thus, in time, these people became the Druids, that is, the people possessing knowledge from the sacred oak. The children of the gods. The 2 foremost children of the Dagda and Bridget were Nuada and Auchma. Nuada was a favorite son of the Dagda, while Auchma was loved better by his mother. He was known as Auchma of the sunny countenance, and invented writing in a calligraphy that was called Ochim. At last, the Dagda and Brigid gathered their children and told them they were destined to populate the earth. The children of the Dagda and Brigid left their cities and traveled to the Island of Destiny, where they waited for their destiny to be fulfilled. 3 of the children, beautiful sisters, were named Bonba, Fotla, and Erra, and each one hoped the Island of Destiny would be named for her. Thus the Celts came to Ireland. Differing versions. In other versions of the myth of the Dagda and Brigid, she is his daughter, not his mate. Nuada is sometimes described as the Dagda's predecessor as High King of the Tuatha De Danann, and Auchma as the Dagda's half-brother. The Book of Invasions. The chief work of the mythological cycle, known as the Book of Invasions, ignores Celtic mythological tales of the world's origin. It was compiled in the 12th century by monks of the Irish Church and purports to be a chronological history of successive waves of invading tribes said to have occupied ancient Ireland. However, most of the stories it contains are bowdlerized versions of ancient tales of Celtic gods and goddesses. The Son of Noah. The Book of Invasions begins with the biblical account of the Great Flood. Unlike the canonical story of the flood, however, the 12th century monk's version had a twist. A Celtic son of Noah, Bit, meaning life, is excluded from his father's ark, and therefore constructs his own ships. Bit and his ships sail into the unknown, and all but his own vessel are lost. Bit's solitary ship, with its passengers, wanders lost for many months, finally arriving in Ireland, where the occupants await the deluge. The floods eventually arrive and wipe out all but a single man named Fintan, who survives for many thousands of years by shape-shifting into the forms of various animals. It was Fintan, claimed the monks, who returned after so many years with the countenance of an ancient Druid and prophesied to the Gaels the coming of St. Patrick, whom he describes as a Druid of an unknown faith. Patrick, according to this prophecy, would cleanse Fintan of his sins and allow him to cease his endless wanderings. The 5 Parts of Ireland. Fintan is also credited with the traditional division of Ireland into 5 parts: Ulster, Leinster, Connacht, and Munster, all ringed around Meath, the location of the Hill of Tara, the legendary seat of Irish kings. After the time of Bit, the islands remained devoid of human life, until the coming of Partholon, another descendant of Noah, who sets foot on Irish shores with Ireland's next wave of colonists. Partholon is more successful at colonization than Bit. He goes about the business of settlement, building houses, planting crops, and battling monstrous, mutated invaders called Fomorians. The Fomorians. The Fomorians, according to the book, were demonic beings and were the original inhabitants of Ireland. They fought against Partholon and his descendants, using supernatural means as well as martial might. Tuan, the shapeshifter. It is not the Fomorians who doom Partholon's settlers, but a fatal disease. All but one man, a nephew of Partholon named Tuan, are destroyed. In an odd echo of Fintan's story, this lone survivor again must make his way through successive shape-shifting. Tuan becomes a stag that leads herds of deer, a boar that roots in the woods, and an eagle that takes to the skies. At last he becomes a salmon and swims in the sacred pools until humans returned to Ireland. The salmon tuan is caught and eaten by an Irish queen, who in turn becomes his mother. The newly reborn tuan is born with all of his wisdom intact, and recounts to his mother's people the history of Ireland, continuing the tale where it left off, with Partholón's successors, Nevet and his people, who were driven out of Ireland by the Fomorians and who return as the noble Tuatha Dé Danann and the wicked and clumsy Firbolg. The Firbolg. The Firbolg, or Bagmen, were also invaders of Ireland, whom the Tuatha Dé Danann defeated at the Battle of Machi Tuidir. They retreated to the Aran Islands off the west coast of Ireland, where they are said to have built a great fort called Dún Aingasa. Neved is said to be a Scythian Greek who comes to Ireland with his 4 sons. Neved and his followers are enslaved and oppressed by the Fomorians, who finally drive them away. Some move to the far shores to be left in peace and become the ancestors of the Firbolg. The remainder travel to the west, where they are schooled in the magical arts. The descendants of Neved return many years later as the Tuatha Dé Danann to drive the Fomorians away and retake Ireland. The Tuatha Dé Danann. The Firbolg tribes are also vanquished by the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, who are but the gods of the pagan Celts in disguise. The stories of the Tuatha Dé Danann provide the best record of Celtic mythological tales. The gods are stripped of their divinity, but retain most of their magical powers and abilities. The gods of the Irish are recounted in the Book of Invasions as yet another conquering tribe, albeit one with fantastic occult powers. The Dé Danann hero, Lugh, finally defeats the Fomorians by driving them into the sea. Travelers to the West. The works of fantasy fiction author J.R.R. Tolkien are heavily based in ancient Norse and Irish mythological tales. Some critics have argued that the inspiration for the races of elves who sail into the West in Tolkien's Ring trilogy is the story of the Tuatha Dé Danann, who recede into the underworld at the coming of the Gaels. However, Tolkien himself professed a general dislike for most Celtic things, preferring the stories of Scandinavian civilizations, from which he drew many of the names for his characters and creatures. The coming of the Milesians. The Tuatha Dé Danann continue to rule Ireland in peace until the arrival of the last invaders, the Gaulish Milesians. The Milesians are named for their chieftain, Mil. The Milesians sailed to Ireland on the advice of Druid seers, and among their party is Mil's son, the legendary bard Avargine. The Milesians are not welcomed by the Dé Dananns, and a series of fierce battles ensues, in which the kings of both tribes are killed. Eventually, the warring parties reach a compromise. The Milesians will rule the upper daylight world, and the people of Danu will take the other world and pass into legend. Ever after, they are known as the Sidhe, the people of the fairy mounds. Chapter 2. The Ulster Cycle and the Fenian Cycle. The Ulster Cycle was told in 2 places, the 11th century Book of the Dun Cow and the 14th century Yellow Book of Lecan. The Ulster Cycle chronicles the adventures of a succession of great heroes, most notably Cuchulainn, a warrior of tremendous stature and ferocity. The cycle begins with the tale of Fergus, an impossibly gigantic king of Ulster. Fergus wishes to marry Nessa, his brother's widow, who will only consent if Fergus will make her young son king. Fergus, all too glad to be rid of the responsibility, readily agrees, and 7-year-old Connor becomes king of Ulster. Despite King Connor's youth, all went well under his reign, until one terrible incident. A wealthy cattleman by the name of Crinneach boasted that his wife Macha, a swift runner, could outrace the king's chariots. Despite her protests, the king forced the heavily pregnant Macha to compete. She won the race, but the exertion proved too much. After giving birth to twin babies, she expired at the finish line, cursing the insensitive men of Ulster to suffer a woman's labor pains whenever the kingdom was under threat. Macha's curse carried down 9 generations of Ulster men, until the birth of the semi-divine hero Cuchulainn. Macha and the Morrigan. Macha, one of the older Celtic goddesses, was often portrayed as a horse. She is sometimes seen as an attribute of the Morrigan, a triplicate goddess of fertility, war, and death. It was to Macha that the heads of the battle dead belonged. The Morrigan, on the other hand, is sometimes referred to as the Queen of Battles, and is often accompanied by her sisters, Bahu the Crow, Namon the Venomous, and Fau the Hateful. Cuchulainn the Great. Cuchulainn's name means the Hound of Cullen. Mightiest of all Celtic heroes, he was the son of the god Lugh, and his mother was Jeshtere, also known as Jeshtane, sister of King Cracher mac Neasa, ruler of Ulster. 2 horses were born at the same moment as he, so he took them as his own, the grey of Macha and the black of Sangliu. Like many other mythic heroes, Cuchulainn's deeds began when he was a boy. When he arrived late at a banquet given in the house of Cullen, a great craftsman and smith, he was confronted by the smith's hound, which growled and snarled at him. Threatened by the ferocious dog, the boy stuffed a ball down the beast's throat, and as it choked, he smashed it against a wall, killing it. Cullen mourned his loyal animal, and the boy, regretting his deed, said that he himself would perform the duties of the hound. Thus he gained his name, the Hound of Cullen. Like most great heroes, Cuchulainn is armed with magical weapons. These include his spear, which inflicts only fatal wounds, and a visor given him by the sea god Manannán mac Lir. In battle, a fury comes over him so that he seems transformed into a monster, filled with rage and bent on destroying his foes. The Cattle Raid of Cooley. The central tale of the Ulster cycle is known as the Cattle Raid of Cooley, the Tan Bo Cualainne, which tells the tales of 2 magical bulls. These are Don Cualainne, the brown bull of Cooley, and Finnebach, the white-horned bull of Aií. The white-horned bull belongs to the wealthy, powerful, and exceedingly avaricious Queen Maeve, whose enormous greed cannot be satisfied. Maeve wishes to humiliate her ineffectual husband, Ailill, and desires to add the brown bull to her already prodigious wealth. Upon hearing of the mysterious affliction of the Ulster men, she set off with her armies to seize the great bull. The Bulls of Cooley. The brown and white bulls of the Cooley saga are no ordinary bulls, of course, but the result of a magical battle between 2 enchanted shape-changers, a pair of foolish magicians, whose end came in a most fitting way. Maeve's armies are not aware of the existence of Cuchulainn, however, and soon meet with furious resistance. clever Cuchulainn invokes the ancient rite of single combat and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?